It's great to see everyone coming in. Familiar faces here.
Good morning, everybody. We're really happy to be with you here today. My name, excuse me, I haven't spoken a lot today. I'm Meg Griggle from the Institute for Community Inclusion at UMass Boston, and I'm here with my colleague, Claire Pape.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you virtually today.
We're really excited to be a part of this event and excited to host this interactive discussion session with you on making it work and making it matter, researching college and career readiness for students with disability. We really took the interactive discussion intention to heart here. So when we recognize it's a little bit of a challenge since we're not together in a room. We were in Joan's session earlier this week, and we just looked at all the attendees and thought, wow, this is a group of people we really want to be in the same room with. Such talented and amazing colleagues. So we will try and move through our session today and give everybody a chance to at least talk a little bit to each other and to us and share some information. So with that, I'll move us forward. I see the people are still entering the room. I think this may be one of the first session times of the day. So I understand if people are just joining us. It's going to be an easy entry, so welcome. And let's just set the context for our discussion today. What we're hoping to achieve is to discuss some of the problems that you're exploring related to college and career readiness, and address or at least identify some of the challenges to implementing effective research design. And then finally, and this is the part that I think is a theme through every session that I've been in, is how to better use our findings to actually improve the outcomes for students with disability, as that is what all of our intention is. But it's a steep hill to climb, and it's a complex thing to make happen. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So just to give you some context of where we're coming at from this session, Claire and I both work at a training and evaluation and technical assistance center called Think College. And it has a range of projects addressing college access and success for students with intellectual disabilities. So you can see what our lane is, and our perspective is really driven by who we're seeking to increase the outcomes for. And that influences our perspective on both what needs to be done to make it work and what needs to be done to make it matter. As part of the Think College series of projects, and this is a screenshot of our homepage of the website. It has 4 of our current, I think we have 5 or 6 projects currently funded around inclusive higher education for people with intellectual disability. And as part of that work, we've established a knowledge translation and dissemination infrastructure that has really become the bedrock of how we move our research findings, we hope, into practice and into changing outcomes for students with, in our case, intellectual disability. And this infrastructure also creates contact points where we have a feedback loop directly with families and practitioners. And frankly, we have a really strong emerging feedback loop with college students with intellectual disability. So we'll use that just as an example of how we're doing it, and then we're really excited to hear how you're doing it. So we wanted to acknowledge the great work of NICSR and our colleagues who are focused on college and career readiness. I just did a quick search of either recently funded or currently funded projects related to college and career readiness using the IES website. And you can see that there's a lot of work being done. It's pretty broad in its range and focus. And it falls into 3 kind of big categories. Intervention research really focused on a specific modality or skill set or a specific group of students. Measurement and construct development, really doing the incredibly complex work of figuring out the components that influence college and career readiness and how they interact and support changes for practitioners. And then secondary analysis using existing data. And that's where our study falls. So seeing what can be learned from data that's already been collected to influence future research, but also really future practice. I think that's where we all come in. Everybody who loves transition or college and career readiness for people with disabilities knows all we really want to do is make things better for students with disability. So I think the college and career readiness, because it feels so good to say, and it's so easy and so concise, and it just sounds like, well, that's what it is so deceptive. It is not simple. It is not easy. And the factors that influence perspective on what it is and what it represents and what we need to change about it to improve outcomes depends on a lot of things. So first of all, are you really talking about college and career? Or are you just talking about college? And is it college for students with learning disabilities in rural communities? Or is it first generation students? Is it students with intellectual disability? So college or career, those two factors and what it takes to achieve those two outcomes really differs depending on who you're talking about, what group of students. And then are you really looking at preparation, that high school experience, transition to college, transition to career? Is that happening while students are enrolled in high school? Is that happening in our case for students with intellectual disability and sometimes autism between the ages of 18 and 21? Or is it happening while they're already in the setting, and how you make sure they succeed? So this college, while it sounds concise and cohesive, I think it is the antithesis to that. It is really a challenging field. So having said all that, we want to unpack it with you guys. You're here at the table. You've all done tremendous work in this area. And we want to kind of give you a chance to talk to each other. I don't know how many chances you've had to do breakout sessions, but we're going to try it. Gosh darn it, we're gonna give it a shot. So here's the questions we're going to be addressing in the next, I don't know, what do we got? 50 minutes left. What your research is, what problem you're trying to address, and what are some of the challenges you're facing in doing that research, and what are the challenges in translating that research into practice. Oh, another thing that's is deceptively dissemination, poof, and then everybody did all the right things and it magically made the world better. But it isn't that easy. So we're going to talk about some of the strategies for really translating research into practice. I'm going to turn it over to Claire to give you, we're sort of using our study as a case study. What we're studying isn't as important as kind of walking through the process of challenges and strategies. So go ahead, Claire.
Right. So we're heading into our first discussion question about what is your research and what challenges you face in doing your research. But like Meg said, just to set the stage, I'm going to tell you about our research and our challenges. I'm just going to give a message to our tech support guy, Oz. If you could set up 5 breakout rooms for when we get to that point, that would be great. Thank you so much. So our study that is funded through IES currently is called Moving Transition Forward. I'm going to tell you about that, but first let me just recognize our fantastic team members. So Meg and I are just part of a larger team that includes both research folks. So we have Alberto and Jay and Zhushan, who goes by Mandy, and Belkis, who are all helping us with the research aspects of the project. But we also have a knowledge translation team that's part of our grant. So Rebecca Lazo is our knowledge translation manager, and as part of the infrastructure of both this grant as well as our center as a whole, we have access to many folks who specialize in knowledge translation. So our grant is, as Meg said, secondary data analysis. We are exploring the composition and impact of transition practices using 2 different data sets. So we're working with the National Longitudinal Transition Study of 2012, the NLTS 2012. And we're using that data set to provide us information on what we're referring to in our grant as conventional transition experiences. So just kind of, the national perspective of what does transition look like for students with disabilities. We're also exploring college-based transition experiences. For that, we're using a data set that we've worked on in some of our other grants, which comes from the transition and post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disability, very long name. We call it TIPSID. So we're working with some data from the TIPSID project that was funded through the Office of Post-Secondary Education. And in using those data, taking out a subsample of youth who were ages 18 to 22 and enrolled in their high school while they were also attending college. So in kind of a college-based, or what we sometimes call a dual enrollment transition experience. What we're doing in our grant is exploring these two different approaches. So just kind of what do they look like? What do conventional transition practices look like? What do college-based transition experiences look like? We're looking at a few different aspects of transition experiences. First, looking for evidence of research-based transition services, so things that we know are predictors of post-school outcomes. To what extent are those things evident within these two different transition experiences? And then digging in a bit to look at how are youth prepared for employment and how are they prepared for college within each of these transition experiences. I'm showing on the screen our theory of change. So we know that all of these things should connect to post-school outcomes around education and employment. One of the challenges that we'll get to is that we don't necessarily have data on those post-school outcomes, especially with the data set that we're using for our conventional transition services. But in terms of how all this kind of fits together for college and career readiness, we know that youth, through their transition experiences, are prepared in some way for their post-school outcomes. And we also know that there's a lot of other moderating variables that go into this as well, in terms of their disability, other things that the youth bring to the table, factors that are related to the family or the school. So all these things kind of go together in that youth's journey to their post-school experiences. So our research is a series of 7 studies. We have sort of a parallel series of studies with each of our data sets, where we're looking at, as I said before, research-based predictors, employment preparation, and college preparation. And then we're doing a comparison between the two transition experiences as well, by comparing some key data points from those two data sets. I'm moving through quickly because I want to get us to our discussion section. So we brainstormed a big list of challenges in doing our research, but then we condensed it into just a few that we thought we would highlight today. Obviously, the research that we're doing is exploratory, it's secondary data analysis. And so we're somewhat limited to the data sets that are available to us already. Data sets that track youth from school into their post-school life, in particular around college. When you get into youth with disabilities, and in particular, the population of youth that our work focuses on, youth with intellectual disability, it's really hard to find data sets that track the youth who are having those experiences, especially when they get to college. So we kind of have to piece together that information from a few different sources. Within those existing data sets, such as the NLTS 2012, which provide us with a lot of information, we're still somewhat limited in the variables that we have available to us when we're exploring things like college and employment preparation. So we don't necessarily have as much granular data on things that we are interested in through those data sets. There's also, somewhat of a disconnect in funding. So there's a focus on K-12 education and research, and then there's a focus on higher education research. And we're seeing that changing a little bit in recent years, as some of the work that NICSR is doing is beginning to cross that bridge from K-12 to higher education. But it is something that we've found to be somewhat challenging to kind of, focus on this youth who are right in the middle of that, and to have our research be funded. So we're kind of crossing two different, stages of life for those youth. And then, especially when we're focusing on youth with intellectual disability, we have very small sample sizes. So there aren't many of those youth out there, in the general population. And once we get into some of these data sets, we are working with small sample sizes, especially when compared with youth and other disability groups. So those are some of the challenges that we face. Meg, do you want to introduce the breakout room, and I'll get things set up here?
Sure. Thanks, Claire. So the first breakout group is really a chance for you guys. We were kind of relieved that it looks like there's about 30, well, down to 29 people in the room.
As soon as you
So
say breakout rooms,
I know, I do the same thing. But our goal was to give you a chance to talk to each other. In this breakout room, you will go in. Claire's putting a link, this link that's on the slide, tinyurl.com, IES 2022. It's going to put you into a Google Doc. It's very basic. The instructions are right at the top, and you're going to answer the breakout one questions. Really, what is your primary, the problem you're trying to solve, and what are some of your challenges? We understand not everybody's going to want to write theirs down. There's room for each group, but we will ask when you come back from the breakout, it's going to be 10 minutes, that you pick one or two challenges that you are willing to share and unpack. Whoever is most happy to talk, we welcome you to choose that as a group. But we really do want to hear from you what some of the challenges you're facing, and we think it'll be interesting to look at them across the different focal areas. So with that, I'm going to say, I guess, Oz, we can start the breakouts and we will see you on the other side.
Okay, looks like folks are coming back in.
Yeah, we had a good discussion in our group. I was happy to hear some stuff. I did try and go in and put in notes in the document. If you haven't had a chance to put in any notes, we're going to use this to sort of guide our discussion. So we'd welcome any notes here. I hope, were there any technical problems? I'm hoping you can put in the chat. So we're going to do one more of these. So I want to make sure that we address it in the next one. Looks like we lost some people. That is the scary part of doing a breakout. Some people are really averse to them and they decide to leave.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes, Meg, to share out from this discussion. So should we just, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm going to focus on the challenges. Well, I don't actually see any other challenges in the document. So maybe somebody can raise their hand if they want to, or put in the chat. Val says we didn't get very far. We did get to meet each other and hear about our research. Oh, okay. Well, good. Well, Val, I'm gonna ask, since you didn't get to talk about challenges, but I know you've probably faced some, do you mind sharing a little bit? You can unmute, I think.
Sure, Meg. Thanks for putting me on the spot.
Oh, come on.
you know me. No. So I am co-PI with Allison Lombardi and Mary Morningstar on the CCR4T project that Meg mentioned. And it is a measurement project. We are in year 3. And so we're field testing this year. Year 1 was really development. And then we did some piloting last year and field testing. And I guess really right now, which I think everybody can attest to, and you probably heard Allison, for those of you who attended the session yesterday on COVID related issues, that recruitment probably has been one of our biggest challenges. We've been very lucky because in our budget, we have a good amount of money to provide stipends to schools. So that's been, a nice incentive. But I think, recruitment has taken longer than we expected, both for the pilot and for our field testing. I would also say that so our measure is being developed and tested for all kids at the high school level. So we want a sample that's representative of general ed and special ed. And what we found this year is that we've got a lot of schools. We've got enough schools that are willing to be involved, but we don't have enough students with disabilities. So we're doing some targeted recruitment now for schools that are willing to just use the assessment with students with disabilities, because we really want to have a nice comparison. So that has been another challenge. And then I think the other challenge, and Allison mentioned this yesterday, was with schools being especially last year with schools being virtual, trying to get kids to actually do the assessment from home through checking their emails and really navigating how to get emails out to students with the schools. And Allison has really been integral in all of that work through both she and Graham Riffenbark, who's our methodologist, or one of our methodologists on the project. So those are some of the challenges that we faced in the last 2 years.
Thanks, Val. Yeah, that session was, I thought, really, really good yesterday. And Lauren put some challenges in the chat. Recruitment and retention of students sounds like very similar, working with already overburdened teachers. I hear that, Lauren. And finding the right measures, challenges we've faced, not necessarily on the project we shared about, but for our other projects. Anything you wanted to share more than that, Lauren?
Well, I'll just add about measures. It's kind of what you said earlier about how complicated transition is. Like, what are really our outcomes, and what are the components that we're trying to understand, and adapting measures from kind of the general ed world, or do we go for more disability related measures? I think that's really complicated and a challenge for us over time.
Yeah, we've struggled very hard, a lot, with finding measures that have been validated, that address college issues that are validated for students with intellectual disability. There are very few that we can find. Amber and John were in our group, and they both talked a lot about with their intervention development, squeezing it in to a 50-minute session, deciding what gets in the curriculum or in the intervention and what has to be excluded, and then convincing teachers that 50, like, oh, you can only do 50 minutes for 4 weeks, or like synthesizing this huge thing of transition and how to prepare somebody. Oh, my arms disappeared. Sorry, got distracted. In these tiny little eye drops of access to students. So I don't know, Amber or John, I think John might have had to drop off, but if anybody else, if either Amber or John want to jump in.
I'm still here, and I have to apologize. I do have to drop off here 2 minutes ago, but it's worth noting that I intend to make it back here shortly. And yes, the condensing things down and trying to decide what are the core features to include when we're talking about such global topics, that really is the ongoing challenge that I hold. But I can't second more or 10 times, what Val just said and what Lauren said about, working, or what Lauren said in the chat about working through the pandemic. And, with our schools and our partners, I recognize as a former teacher that your plate's always overflowing. And what I've been telling our partners is not only that, but now with the pandemic, teachers and educators' plates are broken. So not only are they overflowing, but they're broken. And, that's the challenge, is keeping partners with us and minimizing attrition.
Thank you, John. Yeah, that's huge. Does someone else want to share?
I can jump in where part of our discussion with that, also kind of picking and choosing, and how do we condense all that instruction. The other challenge is when trying to also coordinate or work with general education teachers in inclusive classrooms. And then that puts even more of a strain on the amount of time that we're allowed to implement that intervention. What they see as valuable to spend the time on can be challenging.
Thanks, Amber.
These are all really great points. Meg, in the interest of time, I think we should probably move on.
Yes, ma'am.
Next, I'm the timekeeper here. But I'll let you talk about this slide.
Oh, sure. So obviously there's a lot of challenges in addressing college and career readiness, really making the research effective, doing, the design of it. John talked about how he gets input from a variety of perspectives, not just from methodologists and lit reviews, but also from focus groups, asking students, asking teachers, asking parents what's meaningful to them, what's important, what's the best way to deliver interventions. So on the flip of that, we're talking about not just for research design, but how do you take what you're finding and make it move the needle? And I think there's a couple factors that I think it's worth recognizing, again, how hard this is. So the first one we all know, and I think we've talked about it in a few other sessions, the accessibility of information. Who gets to hear about your findings? It's in a journal article, it's at a conference. Are the people who actually have the power to do something about it in your audiences? I think another really big thing that we have to recognize is how many players are needed to actually implement the new knowledge. Are you trying to make change at a person level? This is an intervention that a parent or a teacher could do one-to-one, or do you need to have a whole group changing their practices? Do you need to change the forms people get? Do you need to change the policy at an institution or a school system? Do you need to look at the budget? Does it need to change their technology budget? Does it need to change how they construct their IEP meetings or how they do assessment procedures? And then who has the power to make those decisions? And how much access do you have to the people or the level of players who actually influence the changes that would be required to implement your findings? Another big piece is the payoff. Is it worth it to them? Amber talked about, how much of your class time can I have access to? Well, if the teacher really thinks that this intervention is going to totally align with everything else they have to do, all the state assessment and all the types of data they have to provide to the state and to the feds, they're more likely to want to do it. But how desirable is that outcome produced by the change by the people that are going to decide whether or not they want to do it? And then dedicated funding and staff, because disseminating is different than implementing. So if you want to hand somebody, it's sort of like we say, it's not enough to hand a parent a piece of information at an IEP meeting. That's not going to change behavior. That's not going to change action. Handing somebody information does not move the needle when it comes to changing their behavior or their actions. So how much of your funding and staffing can be dedicated to that process? Because it takes a lot of work to synthesize the findings of a big research study into 2 or 3 actionable outcomes that a parent, teacher, or student can do. And formatting that in plain language, graphically, putting it on TikTok if it's for a student and not in a old-fashioned newsletter, like thinking about the modalities and how people metabolize content and learning. My kids, everything they want to know how to do, it's YouTube. If it's not on a YouTube video, they're not going to look at it. They're not going to use it. So this is very challenging for those of us who have limited research resources and possibly limited infrastructure. So just to give you a sense, and I'm not saying this is the answer, but these are the technical assistance, communication, and dissemination resources that we have established through various project funding for the Think College National Coordinating Center and some of our other projects. So we have website tools that we can share information, really accessible and searchable. We have community outreach and assistance. So we are able to talk to families, students, teachers, practitioners, faculty. We have affinity groups where people can talk to each other and do some peer-to-peer supports. We run Facebook groups. We also have internal publications where it can be a research report, it could be an insight brief or a fast facts, or translating research into practice in short little blurbs, again, free, available. You didn't have to pay to go to a conference or subscribe to a journal to find out what worked in our study. And then we have these communication and training mechanisms where we are able to do webinars and we're able to get to people. And the point of this isn't, this is what we do. The point of it is, this is complicated. And it's not as simple as, did you present your findings at a certain place? There has to be mechanisms to continue that support. So as you think about how you disseminate your work, what some of the challenges are for dissemination, and then what some of the strategies. Obviously, our strategies are to really invest in knowledge translation, both in staff and funding across all of our projects. We always build it in a really strong way because we know that's the hardest part for us. Go ahead, Claire.
Yeah, so we're going to send you back to your breakout rooms for maybe 8 minutes. We're running a little behind our timeline here. So we want now for you to focus on challenges and strategies for translating your research into practice. So not the doing the research part, but the translating research into practice. So if you grab the link to our notes document from the chat, you'll see we have questions about each of those challenges for translating your research to practice and strategies. We'll come back in maybe 8 minutes and just come back again with something to share before the end of the session. So I seem to have lost some control of my mouse, but I think I'm just going to reopen all the rooms. If you find you're the only person in there, looks like room 3, we may have to move some of you around, but for the most part, you're going back to your same rooms for about 8 minutes.
Those who stuck it out, we are really grateful. But I understand, people have to prioritize their time, but we had a really good conversation. Anybody want to volunteer to share their challenges and some of the strategies?
I'll go.
Thank
you. And I'll be brief. We talked, one of the things that Connie and Marcus were in my group. And one of the things that Connie asked as we were getting off was, she was saying that she's trying to figure out, like, how do you get this information disseminated? And so I guess the one thing that I can say related to just kind of trying to bridge that research to practice gap and disseminate it. I'm lucky because I'm a PI for the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. So we are able, with our CCR4T project, we've done webinars, through INTAC to try to get it, because the majority of our audience are practitioners. And so that's one way. And then Connie, you had asked about social media. And I think, Meg, you were talking about that social media is really, that's what people look at, now. So we disseminate a lot of our, information about the CCR4T. Well, Allison does, because she's more of the social media guru than me, but that's, one way that we've been using. And then Marcus and I were talking, Marcus brought up the point about data literacy. And one of the things that we've done since the start of our project was in focus groups, ask our stakeholders what they wanted from a measure, outcomes from a measure. And so we've developed some data reports that, we share with the schools. Dissemination is our next year 5 that we've started talking about that now. And I think that, one thing that we're going to be thinking about is, well, that's great if we're giving schools reports, but if they don't know how to use the data or think about the data, then they're not going to really be able to do anything with the data. So I think some of the pieces that Marcus had mentioned around data literacy are things that we're going to have to think about on sharing with our schools how to use the data from the CCR4T.
Thanks, Val. That's, absolutely interpreting and finding it useful. If they can do something differently from it, if it informs their practice. Amber talked a little bit how she offers professional development to schools that she works with and provides a synthesis, a teacher-friendly PowerPoint of the findings for the teachers and the principals, so that if they want to share it with others, they can. And again, teacher-friendly, I thought that was a really good way to put it. Because it does have to work in that context and in the conversations they're having. Any other group want to share? We're small now, so I think you can just unmute yourself. That's why people get uncomfortable, because they don't want to share. Well, Akila, because you were in my group, you also shared some challenges. Do you mind sharing them with the group?
Absolutely. So I talked about my experience at a school district doing research for a school district. So 2 challenges I mentioned. The first was about timeliness of results. So district leaders really wanted results quickly, and that was a really hard balance to find. Actually trying to make sure we did good research, but also providing some answers for them when they needed it. And we struggled with that a lot. Another challenge was just making sure we disseminated to the right people. We learned early on that just sharing with leadership was not enough. We really needed to share with the teachers, the people who were doing the work. So that was, I think that helped us a lot to make sure we really were disseminating our results to the people who really needed it.
Thanks, Akila. Yeah, I think that it's across the board the same thing. How do you make it meaningful? How do you make it accessible? And how do you make it useful? That's really the hard part. And usually, as Val said, you're in your last year of funding. You're trying to get things written up because you have an obligation to get 1, 2, God forbid, more 7 journal articles written. But then you also want to create these access points, these welcome mats to what you've learned. And that's where I feel like the important conversations with your target groups have to happen not only before the research, but after. What is the best way for me to share this? And maybe that's bringing, somebody mentioned on a previous one, having an advisory group and getting feedback from them throughout your study. And I think that's another strategy, to have the right voices at the table of what about this is meaningful. We did some research with some coordinators of college-based transition programs in Massachusetts, and they had given us all these data. They were so excited to find out what we learned, but the school systems didn't have a way for them to talk about it. So we had to actually build in discussion time and host meetings, and then there's donuts. But that, if you really want people to start working with you, you have to create the time and space for them, and think about what's going to make it hard for them to sit at those tables or be in those conversations.
I'll just add a couple other things we talked about briefly. One is the idea of policymakers. I was lucky enough to work with a policy institute. So it wasn't part of my study, but they took findings from my study and they were like doing these briefs. And that went out to lots of educators across the state of California, as well as educational leaders. So it's helpful to like link resources with people that do just that thing, like they're used to synthesizing. That's one thought. The other thing that's been interesting for me in the last 2 years, maybe because of the pandemic, just plain old journal articles. Like I've probably gotten more emails from people randomly that said, I read this about your study and I'd like to talk to you. It wasn't someone I met at a conference, but like I'm doing more replication studies, actually even internationally, because of publishing findings in kind of traditional outlets.
Well, that's great to hear, Lauren. I think using academia, ResearchGate, I get more requests for stuff on those outlets. So I think you're right. It does broaden people's access to the information. And I liked the idea of the policy thing. Having people pick, we've worked with AUCD, and they create policy briefs for us and congressional briefs, translating our findings into, we hope, useful information to guide people's understanding of our work. And it is really nice to work with somebody that's their job. Okay, I think we're really close. So I think I'm again going to say thank you, because you guys were willing to share. I loved having a chance just to hear other people. I didn't get to talk to a lot of people at this conference. And so this was just so nice to hear your voices and your input. Making it work and making it matter. We titled this session for a reason, because we really do care about it matters. We want our work to matter. So considering new dissemination partners, which I think Lauren just really talked about how important that can be, maybe non-traditional people you haven't worked with. Remembering to address the so what factor. If you can't answer, so what? Who cares? Always have that conversation with you and your team. And the so what might be different for each audience. Really looking at planning audience specific publications for parents, students, teachers, administrators. And then the thing that I think really makes the difference is your passion. When you tell people this matters, and it really matters, and you're changing the world, you're empowering people with knowledge to make their job better and more impactful. And your passion really changes the way people interpret and want to use your findings. So I just think always honor the fact about how much you care, because how much you care will change how much your work impacts the world and student outcomes. So I just want to say thank you again for everybody who's been here, Akila and Jackie, for sticking it out with us and your support as always. And
thank you for all the nice comments in the chat. Remember to
Oh.
go over to the agenda to give our session all the hearts, right?
Oh.
Like a YouTube
Right.
video now.
Well,
Like,
we give you a heart. We're really happy to spend some time with you. And I hope next year it's in person. I would love to be able to sit and chat with all of you.